At the tender age of 6, Isabel was married to Richard II of England, thrust into a ruthless power struggle where she became nothing more than a pawn. Her innocence was ripped away as she was crowned queen in a chilling, eerie ceremony that marked the end of her childhood and the beginning of her tragic fate. On November 1st, 1396, an eerie chill clung to the air inside St. Paul's Cathedral in London. The flickering flames of hundreds of candles bathed the somber Gothic architecture in an otherworldly glow, their light dancing in the dark corners like restless spirits. The low, haunting notes of the organ reverberated through the vast expanse, its echo filling the nave as a royal procession made its way toward the altar. Yet, this was no ordinary marriage. It was a ceremony born of blood, sacrifice, and desperate political need. At the heart of this dark union stood a child, Isabel of France, Europe's youngest princess. At just 6 years old, she walked toward her fate, a tiny figure dressed in shimmering gold silks that dragged across the cold stone floor. Her small hands trembled as they gripped the weight of a crown too large for her fragile head. In moments, this innocent girl would be declared the Queen of England, bound to Richard II, a man of 29, in a marriage that would forever alter the course of 2 nations. But how had a child of such tender years become the prize in a brutal diplomatic game, a pawn in the hands of merciless monarchs? To understand her tragic story, we must delve into the twisted history of her time. Isabel was born into the madness of 14th century France on November 9, 1389, at the Louvre Palace. Her father, Charles VI, known as Charles the Mad, had fallen victim to a mysterious affliction of the mind. From the age of 24, the king would spiral into violent fits of delusion, convinced he was made of glass and terrified of being shattered if anyone touched him. He believed invisible enemies stalked him, and he would scream in terror, fleeing the palace corridors, unable to recognize his own wife or children. Under such insanity, France fell into chaos, governed by power-hungry regents while the true king remained a prisoner within his own mind. Amid this tumult, Isabel's mother, Isabel of Bavaria, became a figure of cold ambition. She exploited her husband's madness to seize power and wealth, turning her daughters into mere commodities, valuable only for the political alliances they could secure. Isabel, though a child, grew up in this toxic environment, surrounded by court intrigue, warfare, and the chilling indifference of her parents. The 100 Years' War ravaged France, and the country was further torn by the conflicts between the Armagnacs and Burgundians. As the kingdom descended into ruin, Isabel's life became a series of unsettling episodes, a child witness to her father's madness and her mother's heartless schemes. In 1396, when Isabel was only 6, an opportunity rose that would change her destiny forever. Richard II of England, weakened by years of conflict and a crumbling reign, sought peace. Desperate to secure his throne and restore financial stability, his first wife, Anne of Bohemia, had died, and Richard now sought a new bride who could help him solidify his power. The French court, led by the Duke of Berry, saw this as a chance to secure a fragile peace. Isabel, the child princess, was offered up as the prize in a political marriage. The dowry was a staggering £800,000, and a truce of 28 years was negotiated. To a France impoverished by war, this was an offer tempting to refuse, even if it meant sacrificing their own daughter. The cold, merciless negotiations dragged on for months, as Isabel's age was debated like a commodity being sold in a market. Though her age was considered far too young by even medieval standards, Richard, desperate to save his crumbling kingdom, had no qualms about accepting a child bride. The day Isabel was sent to England was a grotesque spectacle, a carefully orchestrated farewell, meant to impress the English. Charles VI, in one of his rare moments of lucidity, tearfully blessed his daughter, while her mother, Isabel, remained detached, treating the departure as a mere transaction. Isabel herself, naive and innocent, believed the journey was an adventure. She took with her only a few toys and a small dog, unaware of the horrors awaiting her. As the young queen arrived in London, she was greeted with lavish displays meant to impress her. Yet Isabel felt only fear and confusion. The grand cathedral was adorned with French and English symbols, and candles were imported from France to light the ceremony. But all Isabel could feel was the weight of her crown and the coldness of the throne she was forced to ascend. There was no joy in her eyes as she was crowned, only a growing sense of dread, the promise of a future shaped by the ambitions of men. Isabel's life in England was meant to be one of protection, but even this small comfort was fleeting. In 1399, at the tender age of 10, Richard II was overthrown and killed, leaving Isabel a widow, though she had never truly been a wife. The English crown, having already spent her massive dowry, found themselves in a terrible dilemma. Isabel, now a prisoner in her own right, spent years pleading for release from her gilded cage. Her letters, filled with desperate cries for help, revealed a girl aged beyond her years, hardened by the brutal forces that had torn her life apart. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. One subscribe from you will be a huge encouragement for us to grow the channel and create even better content in the future. Thank you so much to all the brothers. Isabel's farewell from the French court was no ordinary departure. It was a chilling spectacle, carefully orchestrated to impress the English ambassadors at the Louvre Palace. As she prepared to leave, Charles VI, gripped by the madness that had plagued him for years, had one rare moment of clarity. His eyes filled with tears as he blessed his daughter, a haunting display of a father's love in a world veiled in darkness. Isabel of Bavaria, her mother, showed no such sentiment. Cold and calculating, she treated the event as nothing more than a business deal, a political transaction, an offering of flesh for power. Little Isabel, just 6 years old, had no true understanding of the magnitude of the separation. To her, it was merely an adventure, one that might be temporary. She carried with her only a few simple toys, her favorite dolls, and a small dog that had kept her company in the palace's eerie halls. The retinue that accompanied her was vast, a procession of nobles, servants, and a special guard designated to protect the treasure that was Isabel herself. Their journey from Calais to London lasted weeks, marked by excessive ceremonies and displays in each English city they crossed. The local authorities vied to outdo each other with lavish receptions, each one more extravagant than the last. Yet the child, exhausted by the never-ending pomp and grandeur, was often seen crying, her young heart yearning to return home. In London, the wedding awaiting Isabel was nothing short of monstrous. Richard II, though reluctant, prepared a ceremony so elaborate it would forever be etched into history. St. Paul's Cathedral became a stage for political theater, draped in both French and English fabrics, symbolizing the union of two kingdoms and the death of any innocence. Thousands of candles imported from France flickered ominously, casting long shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the sound of choirs singing in Latin and French prayers for peace that felt hollow in the face of such darkness. Richard II himself, a man who once loved deeply, now presented as a reluctant groom, his heart heavy with guilt. At 29, he was a man of culture, a lover of art and literature. Yet the sight of this child bride filled him with disgust. The ceremony was a mere formality, a political necessity to save his crumbling reign. Isabel, silent and terrified, stood frozen as the Archbishop of Canterbury knelt before her to place the ring on her tiny finger. Her eyes searched the vast hall for familiar faces, but all she found was emptiness. When she was crowned Queen of England, there was no joy in her eyes, only confusion and a rising dread. She was trapped, a pawn in a game she could never comprehend. At the English court, Isabel's life was initially shielded by her tender age. Richard II, perhaps out of some twisted mercy, treated her more like a daughter than a wife. He provided her with French tutors, allowed her to keep her customs, and ensured she was raised with royal dignity. Isabel had her own chambers in Westminster Palace, servants at her beck and call, and the luxuries of a young queen. But her fragile happiness was shattered in September 1399. Richard II, cornered by a rebellion led by Henry Bolingbroke, was deposed and killed in the dark confines of Pontefract Castle. At just 10 years old, Isabel was suddenly a widow, yet never had the chance to be a wife. Her marriage had never been consummated, and with no heirs, her status as queen was but a hollow title. England's new king, Henry IV, saw Isabel as a valuable pawn, but one who was now a prisoner in the royal court. She was locked away in the cold walls of Havering Castle, where she spent 3 long years fighting for freedom. Her letters to her family painted a girl already hardened by sorrow. I am kept here like a prisoner, far from all I love, without hope of return. Only after years of suffering did Charles VI demand her return. But the girl who left France was no longer the same. In 1401, after years of cold, merciless negotiations, Isabel was finally returned to France. But the girl who had left Paris at the age of 6 was gone. Now, a 12-year-old child. She had been twisted and broken by the horrors of her past. The grand return to the Louvre Palace, however, was no reunion of joy. France was in a state of madness and chaos, its own future uncertain. Isabel was not welcomed as a daughter, but as a political inconvenience, a burden on her family, a reminder of the broken promises of kings and courts. But the tragedy of Isabel's life was far from over. In 1405, at the age of 16, she was once again used as a pawn in a cruel political game. Her mother, Isabel of Bavaria, arranged a second marriage for her, this time to Charles of Orleans, a sensitive and intellectual young poet. For the first time, Isabel knew what it was like to be loved not for her title or her political value, but for herself. Their love bloomed in the shadows of court life, a fragile flower in a garden of despair. Yet fate is cruel. In 1407, Charles was captured at Agincourt and imprisoned in England for 25 years. Once again, Isabel was left alone, a widow in all but name, doomed to a life of sorrow and isolation. Life had stolen from her twice the possibility of loving and being loved. As the years passed, Isabel lived a quiet, almost invisible life at the French court, her every action shrouded in the shadows of her past. The child who had once been a queen now dedicated herself to charity and the arts, finding solace in these small acts, though the scars of her traumatic past never fully healed. Her time as England's child queen had granted her a grim understanding of politics and diplomacy, knowledge she carefully shared with the royal family when needed. In 1409, Isabel, now 20, gave birth to a daughter, Joan of Orleans. But as she cradled her child, the cruel irony of her own fate weighed heavily on her. She knew that her daughter, too, would likely be used as a mere pawn in the same political games that had robbed Isabel of her youth and joy. Isabel's life had always been a series of sacrifices made for the sake of political advantage. At the age of 6, she had been thrust into a marriage to solidify an alliance. By 10, she was a widow, her marriage never even consummated. At 12, she had been imprisoned in England, a mere child, caught in the webs of royal ambition. At 16, she was married again, this time to a man who loved her. But even that happiness was fleeting. By 18, her second husband was taken from her, captured in battle and imprisoned for 25 long years. In 1409, Isabel died from postpartum complications, her life consumed by the ambitions of others. Her death was barely noticed by chroniclers, a stark contrast to the grand spectacle of her first wedding. She had fulfilled her role producing heirs and sealing alliances but had never known true freedom. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the objectification of women in medieval politics, the way children, especially royal daughters, were sacrificed for power. Isabel of France's life is a haunting reminder that behind every political treaty, behind every royal marriage, there were children whose futures were destroyed for the sake of peace between warring nations. Please share your thoughts in the comments section. I will discuss this case with you in more detail. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Through Isabel's tragic life, we learn the importance of compassion and the responsibility to protect the basic rights of children. Let the story remind us that love, freedom, and the right to experience a full childhood are values that should never be overlooked in society.